At 75, I had learned to live with quiet. Not the peaceful kind you earn, but the sort that slowly sneaks into your life when people start visiting less, calling less, and eventually speaking to you only when they need something. Still, I told myself it was normal. Children grow, families drift, and old women like me learn to stitch the gaps with patience. My mornings were always simple. I'd brew tea the way my late husband liked it, strong enough to sting the tongue, and sit by the window watching the road. The mailman usually passed by around 9:30, and even though I didn't get much mail anymore, I waited. A letter is a reminder that someone somewhere remembered you existed. Many days none came, but the rare ones did, mostly my monthly checks. They kept me afloat. But one month, they didn't arrive. I brushed it off at first. Delays happen. Paper gets stuck, government offices run slow. I'd lived long enough to know not everything is a conspiracy. But then the second month passed. Then the third. Each morning, I stood at the window with my tea, pretending to enjoy the sunrise, but really, I was waiting, watching, counting the steps of the mailman as he approached my gate and every time kept walking. At first, I thought maybe he'd forgotten me. I wasn't someone easy to forget, but age has a way of making you invisible. Still, the absence of my checks gnawed at me. They weren't late, they were simply gone. When I mentioned it to my eldest daughter, she reacted strangely. "Mom, maybe you're just confused," she said, waving her hand as if brushing away a fly. "You probably misplaced them." I wanted to remind her I wasn't 95 or wandering around the house looking for my glasses when they were on my head. I was 75, sharp, and very much aware of what came in my mailbox. But I stayed quiet. I'd made a rule in my old age. Choose peace over arguments. However, something about her tone, the dismissiveness, it pricked at me. Days later, I noticed neighbors whispering when I walked past. One even gasped softly and turned away. At the grocery store, the cashier asked gently, "Are you okay?" I thought. But she stopped herself before finishing the sentence. Thought what? That I had fallen? Moved away? Or something worse? The first time I heard someone say, "I'm so sorry for your loss," it was to my neighbor, not me. They didn't even glance in my direction as I stood just 3 feet away. I felt a coldness crawl through my chest. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I'd spent my life believing my family loved me, that they'd at least tell the truth about something as basic as whether I was breathing or not. But the more days passed, the clearer the pattern became. Missing checks, people avoiding eye contact, hushed voices, and my own family insisting I was forgetting things. Then one morning, I overheard 2 women talking at the bakery. "It's so sad," one said. "She died alone. Her family is handling everything. Poor soul." They were talking about me. I stood there with a loaf of bread in my hand, my heart thudding so loudly I thought the room could hear it. I wanted to scream, "I am right here," but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I walked home slowly, dragging fear behind me like a heavy coat. Someone had told the entire town I was dead. Someone who had access to my mail. Someone who benefited from my checks. And if I didn't find out who and why soon, they might make that lie real. The morning I decided to visit the post office, I felt something heavy inside me. Not fear, not anger, but a strange calmness, the kind that settles right before a storm breaks. I was tired of assumptions, tired of whispers, tired of feeling like a ghost in my own hometown. I needed answers, and the post office was the only place left that might give them to me. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. The familiar scent of old paper and ink should have comforted me, but all it did was remind me of how much of my life had slipped through envelopes and gone unnoticed. A line of customers stood ahead, and I joined them quietly, clutching my purse, my cane tapping lightly against the floor. The clerks were busy, stamping parcels, weighing boxes, making small talk with customers. But when my eyes landed on the youngest clerk, a girl named Hannah who'd always greeted me with a smile, I noticed something unusual. The moment she saw me, her face paled. Not slightly, completely. Like she'd seen something impossible. She blinked once, twice. Then she whispered to the older clerk beside her, Look who just walked in." I pretended not to hear, but my heart thudded painfully. The older clerk turned, and her jaw dropped. I'd known her for years, long enough to remember her children's names, long enough for her to call me auntie. But the way she stared at me that day, you would think I had risen from the grave. But she's dead, she muttered under her breath. Not quietly enough. The man in front of me spun around, eyes wide. A young woman clutched her package to her chest. Someone gasped loudly. Another stepped back as if I were contagious. Dead. They thought I was dead. My fingers tightened around my cane. I forced myself to step forward. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane building inside me. "I'm here about my checks. They haven't arrived in 3 months." Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then the older clerk cleared her throat. "Mrs. Hale, according to our records you passed away." "I assure you," I said, lifting my chin, "I did no such thing." Hannah fumbled through the computer. Her hands shook. It says here that a close relative submitted a death notification. With paperwork. Signature. ID copies. Everything matched. Everything matched. Someone had forged documents in my name. I felt the room tilt for a second, but I steadied myself. I had lived through worse. Wars, grief, childbirth, burying my husband. I wouldn't crumble now. "Who submitted it?" I asked. Hannah swallowed hard. We can't disclose that without an official inquiry." Official inquiry. Those 2 words lit a spark inside me. My eldest daughter had access to my IDs. She handled most of my mail when she helped me with errands. And she was the only one who knew the exact amount I received each month. The picture formed in my mind, piece by piece, and the betrayal almost brought tears to my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. Because in that moment, I realized something important. If they lied about my death, they were expecting money. And people who expect money from a dead relative rarely want to see that relative alive again. I stepped back, my voice steady but shaking with restrained fury. "Thank you," I said. "You've told me more than you think." As I walked out of the post office, the whispers followed me. "She's alive. How is that possible?" I thought they said. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let the whole town know I had crawled out of the grave they buried me in. Because now I knew the truth. Someone in my own family had declared me dead. And before this was over, I was going to make sure they remembered exactly how alive I truly was. When I woke the next morning, something inside me felt different. Sharper, heavier, and far stronger than fear. It was the feeling of a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore, everything to fight for. If my own family wanted me dead on paper, then I would show the world, loudly, publicly, undeniably, that I was alive. And I would do it where their lies began. At the post office. I chose the busiest day of the week, Monday. People lined up before the doors even opened. I wore my best coat, brushed my silver hair, and carried myself the way I used to in my 30s, when life bent for me instead of the other way around. Every step hurt, my knees ached, my back twinged, but I walked tall. The moment I stepped inside, a hush fell over the room, as if someone had pressed pause on life. Heads turned. A man holding a stack of envelopes dropped them all. A woman holding a toddler froze with her mouth open. Recognition spread across their faces like a wave. Someone whispered, "That's her, the dead lady." Another replied, "But how?" I didn't wait. I marched straight to the counter and placed both hands firmly on it. "I need to speak to the supervisor," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried. I made sure of it. The clerk, looking like she'd seen a ghost crawl out of its coffin, scrambled to fetch him. Moments later, Mr. Branson, the post office supervisor, stepped out of his office. He had always been a confident man, but the moment his eyes landed on me, his face turned gray. "Mrs. Hale," he whispered. "In the flesh," I said, lifting my chin. "Not buried. Not cremated. Not gone. Alive." A few people gasped. Someone dropped their coffee cup. It shattered on the floor. "Sir," I continued, "your office processed fraudulent papers claiming I was dead. Someone forged my signature, used my identification, and redirected my checks. I'm here to file a complaint, and I'd like you to call the Social Services Fraud Division while I stand right here." A stunned silence. Then a rustle of movement, the sound of phones sliding out of pockets. People were recording, whispering, staring. My resurrection had become a public spectacle, exactly the way I wanted. Mr. Branson cleared his throat and nodded with trembling hands. Of course, ma'am. Right away. He hurried into his office and shut the door, leaving a small window where everyone could see him frantically dialing numbers. I waited at the counter, refusing to sit, refusing to look weak. Let the town see me. Let them tell everyone I was alive, healthy, and furious. A woman approached me quietly. Mrs. Langford, my neighbor for nearly 20 years. We were told your daughter was planning your service, she whispered, shame warming her cheeks. We thought, well, we believed her. I simply nodded. I didn't blame them. When your own blood lies about your death, how could strangers know any better? Minutes later, 2 investigators arrived. They entered briskly, their badges catching the light. One of them, a tall, stern man, addressed me respectfully. Mrs. Hale, we've been expecting this case. We received alerts about unusual activity on your account. We'll need a statement, and we'll be opening a full investigation. Good, I said, because I know exactly who submitted those papers. From behind the crowd, my eldest daughter's voice suddenly pierced the air. Mom. Slowly I turned. She stood near the door, eyes wide, face pale, as if she truly had seen a ghost. I felt years of love, sacrifice, and trust crash inside me like broken glass, and then melt away. All that remained was cold clarity. You declared me dead, I said loudly, making sure every witness heard. You stole from me. You erased me. She stammered, reaching out a trembling hand. Mom, it's not what you think. I stepped back. Don't touch me. Her lies had buried me once. Now my truth would bury her back. Legally, publicly, and permanently. And for the first time in months, I finally felt alive. The days after my dramatic return to the post office were a whirlwind. Investigators pored over every scrap of paper, every signature, every transaction. My family tried desperately to explain it away, to rewrite the story, but the truth is stubborn, and so am I. The fraud was undeniable, and the evidence pointed directly to my eldest daughter and the family member who had helped her manage my affairs. At 75, I learned that revenge doesn't always roar. It often whispers with patience. I didn't shout in courtrooms or attack them in the street. Instead, I let the law, the facts, and the witnesses do the work. Letters, checks, documents, all meticulously collected over months of quiet observation, formed a perfect net that no one could slip through. The first time I saw the fear in their eyes, I realized how far they had underestimated me. My daughter, who had once scolded me for being forgetful, now stared at me in disbelief, mouthing words I would never hear again. Mom, please. But I had no pity left. Not for her, not for anyone who had tried to erase me. The community that had once whispered, she's dead, began to see me in a different light. Neighbors offered apologies, some awkward, some tearful. And even strangers stopped me in the street to shake my hand or hand me a note of sympathy. I nodded politely, not because I sought their approval, but because it reminded me how alive I truly was. For years I had been invisible. Now I was visible, and unstoppable. When the back pay finally arrived, it was more than just money. It was a symbol of reclamation. Every cent they had tried to steal from me returned, along with compensation for the months they tried to keep me erased. But I didn't use it for extravagance. I bought a small, sunlit apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Cozy, warm, and mine. No one could enter it uninvited, no one could steal from it, and no one could make me invisible again. I also gave myself a gift that no one could ever take back. Peace. I began each morning with tea on the balcony, listening to birds instead of whispers, sunlight instead of judgment. I walked through streets without hiding behind smiles, without pretending to be fragile. And at night I wrote. I wrote letters that I would never send. Letters to my daughter, to the neighbors, to the strangers who had whispered my death. To remind myself that my voice mattered, that my story would not be buried. The sweet revenge wasn't in watching them punished by law. That was only part of it. The real victory lay in reclaiming my life. I had been declared dead, but I had returned. I had watched the panic on their faces, the shame in their eyes, and the confusion of a community that had believed a lie. That was enough. That, and the knowledge that from now on, I would never again be taken for granted, ignored, or silenced. On a quiet evening, I sat with a cup of tea and thought about the life I still had. The betrayal had hurt, yes, it cut deeper than I could have imagined. But the survival, the exposure, the justice, and the freedom felt sweeter than I had expected. I wasn't just alive, I was thriving. I had been declared dead, but I had outlived their deception. I had outwitted their greed. And I had done it on my own terms. I raised my cup to the sky, a small smile curling my lips. Here's to life, I whispered, my voice steady and clear. To living, to being seen, and to never letting anyone bury me again. For the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully, knowing the world had witnessed my resurrection. And that no one, not even my own family, could take that away from me.